we are starting part 4 today. We have our part 1 through 3 homework due tonight, and then hopefully we can finish the module tomorrow so that we're ready for our exam Wednesday. Also, don't forget the second half of discussion due is also due later. Okay, so where did we leave off in module 4? Oops, not that guy. So in parts 2 and 3, we were building these two calculators here, and they are pretty much the exact same calculator, where the only difference was these pairs of tax rates right in the middle. Other than that, we're using the exact same if statement for taxable income. We're using the exact same if statement to figure out how much is in the first tax bracket versus the second, and just changing those two numbers. So if you want, you can essentially just copy and paste this section down below and update it accordingly. Then there's like the standard data table graphing questions. So we got these graphs over here, which reflect their corresponding tax rates, but they're essentially all the same processes. And then the only other weird question that I suppose shows up in part 3 is it says something like, how much more do you pay in taxes, hypothetical 2 versus 3? And so you can just set up like a little subtraction cell somewhere comparing these two numbers to see how much greater one is versus the other. But that's all there really was to it. There's once you get past the if statement, building the first calculator, all the rest is identical to steps we've done in part 1. So what we're doing today is only a little bit different in the sense that we have more tax brackets to consider. So we're still building a tax calculator, still using if statements to sort of figure out, when I use one rate versus another. We're still using data table for all the graphs, that sort of thing. The main difference is how do we deal with all of this new information? So I want to help you get started on that because it is a little bit tricky. So once again, you're going to start your calculator, the exact same if statement from part 1 to calculate taxable income. And then, just like in parts 2 and 3, the hard part of this calculator is determining how much of this taxable income is going to fit like in the 10% row, the 12% row, so on and so forth. Only some of it is going to be in each row, right? We're sort of cutting it up into smaller pieces. So our goal is to tackle this column here. That's the tricky part. And before we start talking about code, I want to go through a couple examples, just pictures showing you sort of what's happening. So if we have taxable income of 150,000, I'm going to use this vertical picture once again to sort of think of this as like a beaker that we're filling up from the bottom with all of our $150,000 of taxable income. And we got sort of a section for each one of these tax brackets. And so if we were doing this by hand, we would say, okay, well, the first 9875, that's going to be down in this red area, this 10% area. So I'm going to take the first 9875 of my taxable income, place it right there. Likewise, as we continue, I got to figure out, okay, how much is in this blue section? In other words, how much money is in between 40,000 and 9875? Well, we want to figure out how much money is in between there. It's not too difficult. We can just use subtraction on these two numbers to see that there's about $30,250 in this little blue area. So that number goes there. Continuing forward, same process for this green area. It is also completely full. So we figure out how much money is between 85,525 and 4125 by subtracting these two and seeing that that's about $45,400 in this little 22% bracket in this green area. But last of all, the sort of last step, just a little bit different in this orange area. This one is no longer completely full, like let's say this green one, it's only partially full. So I'm not comparing these two numbers anymore because it's not all the money between 163 and 185. It's all the money between 150 and 85. It's sort of all of our leftover taxable income. So we subtract these two numbers now. Instead of comparing just two of these upper bounds, we're comparing this guy here with 85 to see how much past we've gone. And in this case, we've gone past by about 64,475. That's how much overflows into this little orange section here. Okay. And then the last step is very easy. All of these sections are completely empty. We don't have enough money to get up to these ranges, right? We stopped at 150,000. So there's $0 that makes it up into those final tax brackets. Okay, so that's if we were doing this by hand. Not too bad, especially if we can visualize it. But we want to be able to code this, right? Because we want to be able to use data tables for our graphs. We want to use that other thing, GoalSeek, that we demoed last week. And none of that works unless we code these cells here. So let's talk about how this is going to work out. So just like in parts 2 and 3 and 1, we're going to be using an if statement because there are multiple cases we have to consider. So I'm going to single out this green bracket, this 22% bracket is right in the middle. I just picked it randomly. And let's consider the two different things that can sort of happen, right? Well, the first case, case 1, let's say we have 150,000 in taxable income. So we have so much money in this case that this green section is completely full. That's case 1. On the other hand, what if our taxable income just sort of falls in between these two numbers, right? In that case, it's only partially full. So we need to come up with an if statement that can do those two things, right? So let's break it down a little bit further. What do I mean by completely full in this first case? Well, that is when we take every single dollar between these two guys, right? So we subtract them just like we did before, and that's what would go there. On the other hand, what's the math involved when we're only partially full? Well, that's all the dollars between the 60,000 and the lower bound, how much it overflows, right? So that's our second case. So that's two different pieces of arithmetic that could possibly tell me how much money is in this green section, either comparing the two bounds on that section or comparing my taxable income with the lower bound to see how much past it I went. So those are the two cases that I need to build into my one if statement that's going to go right there. Okay, and another thing that's really nice about this if statement is once you figure out this one, you can drag it all the way up and down. This one if statement is going to take care of this whole column if we do it right and we use dollar signs and all that. It even works for this weird bottom row that has words, because when inequalities are compared against words, let's say you have, is 100 bigger than the word no limit? If you do that in Excel, no limit's always going to be the bigger one. Excel treats words almost like infinity. So yes, you can drag it all the way down because inequalities do work with words and they work just like we want it to, which is very nice. So we don't have to do a separate one at the bottom. Okay, so let's pretend we have this is if statement. I drag it up and down. Let's see what happens. Okay, these three look great. I got the first 9,000. I got this one that's full. I got this one that's full. And I even got my little overflow, right? My little partially full 64,000 remaining in this section. However, look what happens if we drag this all the way down. Technically, it didn't quite work the way we wanted to. And the reason why is that there's actually a third case. And this is what makes part 4 more difficult than the previous 3 parts. And the third case is what's happening on the right side of my screen. That's when we don't have that much taxable income and we never even make it to this 22% green bracket. That would be the case where it's completely empty. So our if statement actually kind of needs three things: full, partially full, or empty, like a zero, right? And there's a couple ways you can do this. You can use a new function I've never shown you before called ifs, which is plural. It allows you to do more than just two cases. You could also try multiple uses of our regular if function in one cell. But here's how I would do it, because I think both those other solutions, while they work and they're maybe cleaner because they keep everything in one cell, here's what I think is the easier approach. So first, start with this statement, just like we were talking about earlier, where we have one if statement that either one case, it fills it with the maximum amount possible, or puts all of our remaining taxable income there if it's only partially full. And then the way we're going to fix these weird negatives is we're going to add another column next to it with a second if function. So we have our first if function here. We're going to have a second if function over here. Thankfully, this one's very easy. All it does is it looks to its left and goes, hey, if you're negative, I'm going to change you to a zero. You should have been zero. And if you're not negative, I'm going to leave you alone. And then that has the benefit of fixing these three bottom cells. And that's essentially the hard part done, because look what happens when I add up these numbers here in blue. If I add them up, I have all of my $150,000 of taxable income accounted for. So you don't have to do this sum down here, but I like to because it's a good way to check. If all of your taxable income is accounted for, you probably did it right. And then finishing the calculator is extremely easy at this point. It's just like part two. You take this nice fixed amount, tell me what 10% of that is. What is 12% of this guy? So on and so forth. Add them up. There's your tax bill. But the hard part is this guy, and then just one more additional if statement that sort of fixes that first one. That's how we're going to deal with that third case. So this is our primary goal today. How do we program this stuff? So it's just two if statements, one for this column that you're going to drag down, one for this column that you're going to drag down. And that is sort of my tip of how to get started.